Getting brand new reaction now from the vice president. After an action-packed week, both at home and abroad, Mike Pence set to take the stage at CPAC 1 hour from now, where the theme today is America First. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith.
Good morning to you. Good morning. I'm John Scott. The vice president speaking to conservatives this morning, hours after President Trump returned from his second North Korean summit without an agreement. The president telling our Sean Hannity he is still optimistic about a deal in the future.
I wasn't satisfied, and perhaps he wasn't satisfied. Good relationship, but I decided that this wasn't the right time to sign something. I have a feeling something down the line will happen, and it'll happen, it'll be good. But this just wasn't good.
You said this isn't the deal.
Well, let's call it both. We'll get something worked out eventually.
Can you give us any insight into where maybe the sticking point was?
Well, they wanted to denuke certain areas, and I wanted everything. And the sanctions are there, and I didn't want to give up the sanctions unless we had a real program. And they're not ready for that.
Awesome.
Ellison Barber is live at the White House right now. Ellison.
Hi, John. Yeah, even without a deal, President Trump is still saying that they had a very good 2 days. He says that just neither he nor Kim were ready. President Trump tweeting this morning, great to be back from Vietnam, an amazing place. We had very substantive negotiations with Kim Jong-un. We know what they want, and they know what we must have. Relationship, very good. Let's see what happens. Talks ended early without a deal, and initially both sides offered different accounts of what happened. President Trump says he understands, at least to some degree, North Korea's desire to keep parts of their nuclear program.
They spent a lot of time building it, and that doesn't mean the world has to be happy. But I wanted them to denuke, and they wouldn't do the full. They wanted to do some, and I guess a lot of people would have said that's a great start, but I just didn't feel it was right.
President Trump says Kim told him he is not going to do any sort of nuclear or ballistic missile test. In the president's word, no rockets, no anything. For now, the future of North Korea's nuclear program remains a question mark. John?
Front page report in the New York Times today on Jared Kushner. Ellison, tell us about that.
Yeah, that report is raising a bunch of new questions about Mr. Kushner's security clearance. According to this report, President Trump ordered his former chief of staff to give his advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a top-secret security clearance last year, overruling intelligence officials as well as the White House counsel. This is all according to that report in the New York Times. The Times reports that this decision worried senior administration officials so much, including then White House chief of staff, that Kelly wrote a contemporaneous internal memo about it. The White House says they do not comment on security clearances, but a spokesperson for Mr. Kushner's attorney told Fox News in 2018, White House and security clearance officials affirmed that Mr. Kushner's security clearance was handled in the regular process with no pressure from anyone. John?
All right, Ellison Barber at the White House this morning. Ellison, thank you. And we will have more reaction from the White House to both of these stories still ahead. Counselor to the President, Kellyanne Conway, set to take the stage at CPAC. In moments, she will be here to join us with a reaction next hour, 10:40 Eastern Time.
Looking forward to that. But first, today's theme at CPAC may be America First, but day one was all about conservatives making the case against the liberal move towards socialism.
A young Bernie Sanders that was talking about it's good to be in line to wait for food. I mean, give me a break. We've got to get to a point where we celebrate capitalism. If we start this socialism, you know, I guess Ocasio-Cortez is doing it in her office.
To pay for the Green Deal, all you need to do is just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. This is such a naive thought in the world of debt.
I want you to put socialism on trial. I want it debated, I want it rebutted, and I want to convict socialism. That's what I want to do.
Joining us now is Matt Schlapp, former White House political director and chairman of the American Conservative Union. Matt, you were one of the first folks out on that stage yesterday morning. We saw you walk out with Jim Jordan. You didn't have to watch long to see a theme quickly emerge.
Yeah.
And the target has certainly been socialism on that stage there.
Yeah, there's no question. I think what we're seeing at CPAC this year, Sandra, are the emerging themes of what the presidential campaign will all be about. And people might have thought that the themes were going to go in one direction, but the results of the 2018 election have been impactful. Having all these new avowed socialists come and populate the Democratic majority in the House, it's frightened a lot of Americans. They jumped the shark, and we are going to talk about it. And I think the Vice President is going to talk about this today in just a few moments. Larry Kudlow literally put socialism on trial yesterday, and he wishes us to convict it.
Yeah, those were certainly some strong words there. The theme today is America First. What is the message, Matt?
The message today is we're going back on this question of, some people say, well, is CPAC all just about President Trump and MAGA? And we're taking a step back and asking, what actually makes America great? And what we believe is that, going back to foundational principles of the Constitution, which includes securing borders, it includes embracing the idea that America is a nation and there's nothing wrong with nationalism, and it embraces the idea of that giving the individual American people freedoms to live the lives they want to live. A lot of people in the media try to say that the conservative movement is mean and intolerant and unsympathetic. And when you walk these halls and listen to these speakers, you believe actually our vision is to allow Americans to live the life they want to live, to chart their own course.
Obviously, that also includes taking on the message on the left, much of which is socialism. Also the discussion of who will be running when it comes to the long list of Democrats who have already announced, and those that have not officially, such as Joe Biden. He's taken a lot of heat for something he said yesterday about his successor. Watch this.
The fact of the matter is, it was followed on by a guy who's a decent guy, our vice president, who stood before this group of allies and leaders and said, I'm here on behalf of President Trump. And there was dead silence.
Liberal activist Cynthia Nixon responded in a tweet. She said, you've just called America's most anti-LGBT elected leader a decent guy. Please consider how this falls on the ears of the community. I don't have much time. Biden responded and said, you're right, and issued other words there. You can read them yourself, but I just want to get your response to this back and forth, Matt.
It's the radicalism of what's happening to the Democratic Party. Look, the conservative movement in the Republican Party believes that each American has the right to make their own decisions on how to live their life. And the fact is, if Mike and Karen Pence are people of faith and they want to live out their faith in their own individual lives and with their family, guess what? That's also protected by the First Amendment. It's the growing intolerance on the left towards Americans who simply want to make their own religious choices, including their own sexual choices, that should be respected. And I'm sad that the left won't respect their choices.
All right. Well, a lot more coming up there. We know Kellyanne Conway speaking. She's going to join us a bit later. Mike Pence at the top of the next hour on that stage. Matt Schlapp, thank you for coming to the camera there. We know it's a busy morning for all of you folks there. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Sandra.
Well, the U.S. Congress isn't finished with Michael Cohen just yet. The president's former lawyer will return to Capitol Hill next week for more closed-door testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. This is Congressman Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows asked the Justice Department to investigate Cohen for perjury, claiming he lied during his public testimony on Wednesday. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel live at the White House. This is the president's former fixer we're talking about here. What is President Trump saying about Michael Cohen? Mike.
John, good morning to you. President Trump says that Michael Cohen was shopping around a book that had the exact opposite message from his testimony that we heard on Capitol Hill this week. The president tweeting, Congress must demand the transcript of Michael Cohen's new book given to publishers a short time ago. Your heads will spin when you see the lies, misrepresentations, and contradictions against his Thursday testimony. Like a different person, he is totally discredited. Meanwhile, Cohen spoke to reporters briefly after 3 days of testimony on Capitol Hill.
Not much I can say other than it was very productive. As I said, I'm committed to telling the truth, and I will be back on March 6th to finish up. There's more to discuss. So thank you guys so much. I'm sorry you guys had to stick around all day long.
The president says since Democrats have not been able to find collusion, now they're following around discredited Michael Cohen. John?
So is this just the beginning of what House Democrats are planning in terms of investigation?
John, there seems to be no question about that. We heard in the open hearing on Wednesday, Democrats asking Michael Cohen for names of people they should bring in for interviews or hearings, and so plans are already in the works.
On March 14th, we'll have an open interview with Felix Sater on Moscow Trump Tower. Not every hearing is going to be like the open hearing with Michael Cohen. We're going to try to do as much as we can in open session. Some we can and some we can't. Next week with Michael Cohen, we'll continue to be in closed session. We have to look at these on a case-by-case basis in terms of the investigative needs as well as equities of the Department of Justice. But we are going to try to do as much as we can.
And that's just House Intelligence. You can expect plenty more hearings in other committees looking into the president's business dealings, his administration, and even his family. John?
Busy times in Washington. Mike, thanks very much. Mike Emanuel.
Yes, sir.
More breaking news from overseas. Pakistan trying to tamp down tensions with its nuclear neighbor, India, after a series of cross-border attacks. The latest on that straight ahead.
Also, freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reportedly saying she will work to oust moderate members of her own party when they vote with Republicans. Is this evidence of a bigger problem for Democrats? Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin joins us to react.
And an abrupt end to the second historic summit with North Korea, and still a big question mark when it comes to a trade deal getting done with China. How markets are responding. Maria Bartiromo will be here next.
We're negotiating now with China and others, Mexico, Canada. We've done those deals. They have to get approved by Congress. We'll see what happens. Dealing with Congress is never easy.
America's Newsroom.
Indian plot captured in a downed, an Indian pilot, in a downed plane. This is video, by the way, of a convoy escorting the pilot to a border crossing between the two nations. Pakistani officials calling the handover a gesture of peace after cross-border attacks earlier this week escalated a long, simmering tension there. India and Pakistan have clashed for decades now over the disputed Himalayan region of Kashmir, and both are armed with nuclear weapons.
Freshman New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reportedly warning Democrats, the moderates, who vote with Republicans, that their names are going on a list, saying she will work to help defeat them in the 2020 elections. About 24 Democrats broke from their party and sided with Republicans on an amendment in a gun control bill. Republican New York Congressman Lee Zeldin joins us now. Let's talk a little bit about what this amendment was, Congressman. Republicans wanted ICE to be notified if illegal immigrants purchased weapons or tried to, right?
Absolutely. Common sense measure. My constituents strongly support it. And I'm sure for many of those Democrats, there's actually 31 in House districts that Donald Trump won in 2016. There are many other Americans who agree with the amendment as well. ICE should be notified. So for those Democrats who are breaking ranks, they don't view AOC as their boss. They don't want to be called a puppet of Nancy Pelosi. They make that decision. Now they have to make a decision as far as future votes that come up as well, whether or not they're going to be their own man, their own woman, or they're going to end up getting on board with AOC and her agenda as if she is their boss.
So Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez reportedly told Democrats in a closed-door meeting that if there are more votes like this, if Democrats vote with Republicans, they're going to be on a list, some kind of a hit list that she's apparently going to work to try to vote down in the next election.
Yeah, it's unfortunate where you hear about diversity from AOC and others in their conference. Obviously, I guess it doesn't include diversity of thought. There are people who are Democrats in this country, and there are Democrats who are in Congress who may believe the world isn't going to end in 12 years, that they don't believe that the Green New Deal and the $93 trillion price tag is affordable, or that we should have a 70% tax rate in this country, or that our country can afford to provide free health care, free education, free housing to everybody. So if
I was a House Democrat right now in one of these districts being targeted because Donald Trump won it in 2016, I would actually be going to AOC and be begging her to get on her list. So the threat obviously should be one that should be confirmation for their voters that they're being independent of this far left, this radical left of their party. But what we started to see, the next vote, the next day, yesterday, the next time we had one of these votes, many of these Democrats who voted with Republicans, they must have got spooked by AOC because they started voting with the Democrats and Pelosi right away the next day.
Well, and Speaker Pelosi said, we're all on one team. You're either with us or you're not. She seemed to be essentially falling in line with Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, and if getting on the same team was a desire to work with the president, to work with Republicans, to move our country forward, to try to find common ground, to try to find bipartisanship on important issues, that would be something that we all should be embracing. The problem is that, as we saw with the Michael Cohen hearing that took place, and all the distractions related to impeachment. I serve on the Financial Services Committee with Maxine Waters. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee, where this week we had Madeleine Albright, and you could tell as these hearings are taking place that their desire is to just oppose, impeach, resist, obstruct everything and anything. That's not a key ingredient for them to maintain the majority. And I'll tell you, as a member of the House Republican minority, we don't plan on staying in the minority past 2020. And Pelosi and AOC, they're going to help our cause if they continue to play along with the desire to just undercut the president at every turn. That's not what the American people want, what my constituents want, and I'm sure in those districts that President Trump did well in, it's not what those constituents want either.
Yeah, that was my very quick question. Don't Americans want bipartisanship? Don't they want cooperation on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, 100%. They want to see our president successful. They want to see Republicans and Democrats in Congress working together on key priorities to help grow our economy, to strengthen our national security, to take care of veterans and first responders, to do so much more, combating human trafficking, drug trafficking, securing our borders. And when you put all those important policy priorities aside for instead hyper-partisan politics to try to take out Donald Trump, it's going to bury them at the polls next November. People want to see bipartisanship, not that.
Congressman Lee Zeldin, Republican of New York, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, John.
Fox News alert, the U.S. government now saying Osama bin Laden's son is emerging as one of the leaders of al-Qaeda. How much the U.S. is willing to pay to find him.
Plus, Republicans pushing back against President Trump's national emergency declaration. So, will he have to use his veto pen?
I support what the president wants to do on border security, but I do not support the way he has been advised to do it.
The field of Democratic presidential hopefuls growing by one more today. Washington's Governor Jay Inslee announcing his 2020 presidential bid in a video posted this morning. He also plans to hold a news conference in Seattle, followed by trips to Iowa and Nevada in the coming days. Inslee is the first governor to join the already crowded field of Democrats that boasts 11 other official candidates so far.
Our opponents are proposing to overturn America's success and its greatness. It's crazy stuff. The Green New Deal would literally destroy the economy. It would knock out energy, transportation, airlines, jobs, businesses. We'd probably lose 10 to 15% of our GDP. It's remarkable. I ask you to join President Trump and me and the rest to put socialism on trial and convict it.
White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow there slamming the rise of socialism on the left during a fiery speech yesterday on the stage at CPAC. Let's bring in Maria Bartiromo, host of Sunday Morning Futures here on the Fox News Channel and Mornings with Maria on Fox Business Network. I know you know Larry very well.
Yes.
You talk to him often and you worked with him for many years. He was not messing around there.
No.
Put socialism on trial, convict it.
Yeah.
And this is quickly emerging as the message there on the stage at CPAC this week.
But, you know, Sandra, it should be, right? Because it's so far left from what Americans really want in the economy. And look at some of the programs that you've seen from some of the contenders for the 2020 election. 70% tax rates. The Green Deal. Obviously, the Green Deal was not very well thought out at all. If you're going to have to destroy all of those industries like transportation, energy, if you're going to have to eliminate fossil fuels within 10 years, that makes no sense. Anybody who knows the science of this understands that fossil fuels is not going away within 10 years. We need that to actually get on a plane, take a drive. Then you've got Medicare for all. Medicare for all is actually, as the Wall Street Journal and James Freeman often says, Medicare for none, because this is another federal program that wipes out the private insurance industry. You know how many people get their health insurance from the private insurance industry? 160 million. I mean, think about that. 160 million people are going to lose their health insurance because they want Medicare for all. So all of these programs, they say that they're not socialist, but they actually are. They're all large federal programs that will mean a bigger government bite. They're trying to distance themselves from the word socialism. They think that's a bad word, and yet they come out with these programs that are every way you look at them, socialist programs.
He spent a large chunk of his time on that stage ripping into what he called crazy ideas that are emerging on the left. And meanwhile, we are just now 24 hours now from the president walking away from that deal in Vietnam with North Korea. Market impact there, and what does it tell us about a potential deal with China? The president clearly showing he is willing to walk away if the deal is not right.
And I think you're spot on, and that's what he basically tried to tell the world. I'm willing to walk away if it's not the best deal for the United States. And look, I think in retrospect, you know, all over CNN yesterday was failure this, failure that. Actually, this was a real success because the president proved that he is not going to give away the store. If there is not going to be denuclearization, well, guess what? Then the sanctions will stay in place. And I think he's trying to show that kind of oomph with China as well. Basically saying to China, it's not just about China buying more stuff. It's not just about China buying more soybean and grain. It's about China moving the needle on a commitment to stop stealing. You know, that's why there's so much worry about Huawei Telecom, because we've seen instances when this company has spied on their clients.
I want to get the sound in here because you had on the chief security officer of Huawei, because this telecom giant, and this is fascinating that you were able to speak with him, Maria, they're putting themselves out there, making the case, trust us.
Right.
Here was that moment this morning.
The pressure on Huawei is part of the geopolitical dynamic between the U.S. and China. It's also part of the fact that the U.S. government is trying to seriously address the risk to the United States globally with the rising power of China economically and militarily, and trying to do a whole lot more, led by the Department of Homeland Security, to protect our critical infrastructure and work to protect our allies.
They are out there trying to convince the world that they are trustworthy. Were you convinced?
I was not. They took out an ad in the Wall Street Journal saying, you've got to trust us, come see us. But look at the history of the company, Sandra. Look at all of the lawsuits that have sued Huawei for stealing trade secrets. Cisco settled a lawsuit for Huawei stealing trade secrets as it relates to routers. Motorola Solutions, they had to settle with them because of stealing trade secrets, as well as T-Mobile, which is right now, we're going to see more of that in the next couple of weeks. Cisco, you know, we've got all of these companies that have already told us that they are in the middle of lawsuits and settlements with Huawei because of this.
It was a great interview. Markets opening in just a few moments from now. Maria Bartiromo, thank you. Always good to have you here.
Thank you.
John?
A major milestone for grassroots conservatives, the Tea Party, marking 10 years since the movement's first nationwide protest. So what's next on the agenda?
Plus, can New York City win back Amazon? How Governor Mario Cuomo is courting the company after Andrew Cuomo, after the company and progressives cheered when the deal fell apart.
I think that really it's a very dangerous thing for people to be voting against border security for anybody, including Republicans. I really think that Republicans that vote against border security and the wall, I think, you know, I've been okay at predicting things. I think they put themselves at great jeopardy.
That's the president there reacting to Republicans who are not inclined to vote with him on his declaration of a national emergency that he wants to build his border wall. 3 Republican senators already have indicated they will vote in favor of a resolution to block that declaration. Let's bring in Washington Post contributing columnist Gary Abernathy. He is out with an op-ed on the issue. You can find that on foxnews.com. Gary, you think the building of the wall is just common sense?
Well, and I'm trying to represent what a lot of people think who I know where I live, John, and that's what I try to bring to the Post in my columns is not always necessarily what I think, but what a lot of folks I talk to think in my part of the world. And what they can't understand is why having a wall is in any way immoral or shouldn't be part of a strong plan to keep illegal immigrants from coming in illegally. You know, people where I live, they support legal immigration. They understand that they are themselves descended from, immigrants, that we're all immigrants. Almost all of us in this country immigrated here, at least our ancestors or forefathers did. But they can't understand why it's wrong to make sure people are vetted, to make sure people who come into the country are law-abiding and want to come in for the right reasons, and why a wall shouldn't be part of that whole plan.
Yeah, let me read the first of a couple of sentences that we've lifted from your piece. You say that opponents of the president's national emergency declaration insist there is no new emergency, and on this his supporters largely agree. However, to them, the emergency has been long-standing, with no previous president or Congress willing to seriously address it with the sense of emergency it demands. So you're saying this is a national emergency that's been with us for, what, a couple of decades now?
Well, yes, a lot of people who oppose the president on this are saying, well, there's no new emergency. They say illegal immigration is actually down in terms of people trying to come in. They make the argument that illegal immigrants are less likely to commit as much crime as natural-born citizens. And a lot of folks respond to that by saying, well, what does any of that have to do with anything? If we can prevent even the amount of crime, even if it's smaller in numbers, that happen because of illegal immigration, shouldn't we do everything in our power to do that? And John, I was struck, I was listening to you earlier today, and you're talking about the president, and some people are saying there's a constitutional crisis with his declaration of a national emergency. That's hardly the case, is it? I mean, we're proceeding as we should. Congress is responding. They're voting whether to, not support the president, to try to stop the president's emergency declaration. If they come up with enough votes, he'll veto it. If they come up with enough votes to override the veto, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine. The constitutional authorities and separation of powers are playing out exactly as they should. A very wise judge said to me once, the law is not a particular outcome. The law is achieving a process. And so the process is happening right now as it should.
Well, what about, the argument that some Republicans make that if this Republican president uses this emergency declaration to spend money that he wants to spend, what's to prevent the next Democrat president from doing exactly the same thing, in contravention of what Republicans might want?
Yeah. And it's a very good argument, and a lot of people understand that. In my personal opinion, I think that a president trying to protect the nation's borders, to secure the United States from outside threats is one of the top priorities of any president, Republican or Democrat, and courts are more likely to look at it that way than a future president, maybe a more liberal president, who tries to use national emergency powers on things like maybe climate change or gun control, which are two examples that have been used.
Gary Abernathy, who hails from Ohio and is also a Washington Post columnist. Good to talk to you. Thanks.
Venezuela turning to an ally for help amid a deepening crisis. The nation's vice president is in Russia to rally support for the embattled Maduro regime. The visit comes amid increased pressure from the U.S. and as unrest continues there. Steve Harrigan is live in Caracas, Venezuela this morning. Steve?
Sandra, the struggle between the two men who claim to be president of Venezuela is taking on Cold War overtones, with Russia backing one, the embattled president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and the U.S. backing the opposition leader, Juan Guaido. That played out yesterday at the UN Security Council, the UN putting forth a resolution that would call for new, free, and fair presidential elections in Venezuela. That resolution vetoed at the UN by Russia. In the meantime, opposition leader Juan Guaido is in Paraguay today. He was in Brazil yesterday, Colombia before that. But the real question is, when and how will he get back here to Venezuela? The Maduro regime had placed a travel ban on him, so it's not clear he will be able to return without getting arrested. Guaido has said as soon as he gets back, he's going to start exercising all the duties of president. It's not clear how he's going to do that with the army, the military, the police still under control of Maduro. Finally, U.S. oil sanctions have begun to hit Venezuela hard. Their exports are down 40% over the past month. This is a key source of cash for the Maduro regime, but it's not clear yet that's going to be enough to drive Maduro from power. Sandra, back to you.
All right, Steve Harrigan in Venezuela for us this morning. Steve, thank you.
It has been an action-packed week, including the president walking away from the North Korea summit, Michael Cohen's explosive testimony on Capitol Hill, and conservatives rallying together at CPAC right now. Kellyanne Conway, the president's advisor, joins us to react to it all next hour.
And President Trump optimistic an agreement with North Korea is still possible. Senator Joni Ernst will be here on that.
And those who are truly aimed at destruction and evil and corruption. America has a responsibility to protect itself by pushing back against those evil nations and those evil leaders who intend to do real harm to the world.
Caught on camera, a Florida teenager in critical condition after a hit-and-run rollover crash in Sarasota. Hotel security video shows the 19-year-old swerve his Audi to avoid a minivan that turned into the street. The van clips the driver's side of the car, causing it to flip over 3 times into a nearby parking lot. The minivan then takes off. Just seconds later, police are still looking for the driver of that minivan.
Vice President Mike Pence set to take the stage just a few moments from now at CPAC, where today's theme is America First. The speech coming after the second nuclear summit with the president and Kim Jong-un ends with no deal. Here's Senator Lindsey Graham from yesterday.
He said, I'm not going to relieve sanctions for a partial deal. I said, that's the only good deal is for them to give up their nuclear program in return for security assurances and economic assistance. I hope and pray that the talks continue, but if they break down, it's time to end their nuclear program one way or the other.
Joining us now is Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. She serves on the Armed Services and Judiciary Committee. She's also vice chair of the GOP conference. Senator, good morning to you. We know you've got a busy morning there. Thank you for stopping in America's Newsroom first. What did you think of the president walking away from that deal?
I think it was absolutely the right thing to do. The asking for those sanctions to be lifted is ludicrous. The North Koreans need to understand, Kim Jong-un needs to understand that they need to denuclearize and make sure that they do it soon. And when that happens, certainly the president will be ready to deal. But what was presented to the president, it was not the right direction. And the president is a good enough man, he's a great enough negotiator to know when to get up and leave.
I did not hear you say if that happens. You said when that happens. It sounds you're optimistic a deal will still get done in the future, Senator.
Well, I remain optimistic, and I will, as long as we have President Trump negotiating. I think we do have some leverage here. So I am optimistic. I will remain so, but we know that the ultimate goal has to be denuclearization on that peninsula in order to make sure not only are our allies in that region safe, but we are safe here on the homeland as well.
I want to get your thoughts more broadly speaking on what's happening around the world right now, Senator. Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House, penned an op-ed titled "Incredible Changes Are Taking Place Around the World." In that opinion piece, he writes, in fact, the world is perhaps more in flux now than any time since the end of World War II. It was published on FoxNews.com today, and Senator, in that piece, he points to France and the reform efforts there, Italy, the economy shrinking, the European Union, and the problems with Brexit. What are your thoughts in this moment in time as we look at what is happening around the world?
Well, we certainly do have a world in flux. We have a lot of unrest throughout the world, and with that you do see changes. As migrants have moved from the Middle East into Europe, we've seen great changes there. We will always see changes. Some periods of time are more stable than others, but I think that the speaker is correct. Mr. Gingrich is correct that we are a world in flux, and that's where we really need to step forward as America and be that world leader. We need to show that we are strong enough to lead our allies through these changes and make sure that there is peace and prosperity for everyone. We want to enable those countries to live in peace, but they also want freedom. So that's where we can be the leader.
Senator, we know the theme there at CPAC today. We can feel the energy in the room there behind you is America First. What will be your message when you take to the stage a few moments from now?
Well, the message that I have and on that panel that I'll be on this morning is that America can be first. America first does not necessarily mean America alone. And we know that working with our allies, we can be the world leader that is so needed in such turbulent times.
Senator, I've got to ask you about what is happening next in the Senate when it comes to this resolution in the House that passed against the president's declaration of a national emergency to fund the border wall. What is going to happen in the Senate here? Your colleague Lamar Alexander delivered an ultimatum to the president, reconsider your national emergency declaration. What do you want to see happen? What do you support here?
Well, I think we do have a crisis at the border. We have a humanitarian crisis, and we can't continue to allow thousands and thousands of undocumenteds cross our borders every day. So we do need to see some action. The president has chosen this path forward. I think that we can come to a consensus. I am leaning towards supporting the president because I do believe that we need to do something on our border. Of course, I would rather that Congress took this upon themselves, and we were not able to do that. So the president has found a way forward, and we will work through that path forward.
So you would not vote to block the president's national emergency declaration. Is that what you're saying?
I would not vote to block it, but certainly I think that we do need to scrutinize what is going on in the use of national emergency powers, and that's where I think that Congress needs to play a much greater role. Senator Mike Lee is working on legislation which would address this, and I'm anxious to see what our final discussions bring forward. But again, I think the president is spot on. We do have a humanitarian crisis. We do need to do something about securing our borders and making sure our citizens are safe.
Senator Joni Ernst, a busy morning there. We appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.